The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows across the weathered porch of the old Miller farmhouse. 60-year-old John Miller carefully lifted Emily, a young woman no older than 30, into his arms. Her body was frail, her limbs unyielding. He carried her with a practiced tenderness, his steps measured and deliberate as he navigated the overgrown path towards the creek. The whispers followed them, clinging to the humid air like gnats. They buzzed from behind faded curtains, from the shadowed corners of the town's general store, and from the lips of women gathered at the Willow Creek Cafe. An old man and his young daughter-in-law, bathing her in the creek every day. What else could it be? Martha, the cafe's owner, leaned in, her voice dripping with a vinegar tang. Michael's been gone less than a year, and John's getting awfully comfortable with the widow. Mark my words, something's not right. Sarah, a younger woman with eyes that held a deep sadness, attempted a weak defense. John's always been a good man. Maybe he's just helping her. Helping? Or helping himself? Martha retorted, her laughter sharp and brittle. Don't be naive, Sarah. This town's seen enough to know better. Folks don't do things out of pure kindness anymore. At the edge of the creek, John gently lowered Emily onto a makeshift seat he'd fashioned from smooth stones. The cool water lapped at her bare feet. All right, Em, not too cold? Emily's lips curved into a faint smile. It's perfect, John, just like you always make it. Her voice was thin, barely a breath, but filled with a warmth that defied the chilling rumors. As John began to bathe her, carefully washing her hair and body, his gaze was one of unwavering compassion. He saw not a woman, but a daughter he had never had, a child entrusted to his care. Yet, even in this quiet haven, the whispers clawed at him. He felt the eyes of the town burning into his back, questioning his motives, judging his soul. He knew that the innocence of his actions was being twisted into something dark and ugly. He finished quickly, his movements efficient but never rough. He wrapped Emily in a thick blanket, his calloused hands trembling slightly as he lifted her once more. As he carried her back towards the house, a heavy weight settled in his heart. He feared that the rumors, the accusations, would eventually break them both. The story of John, Emily, and Michael was etched into the very fabric of Willow Creek. A small, isolated town nestled deep in the heart of Kentucky. The town was a patchwork of weathered barns, crumbling houses, and fields that stretched out like endless green quilts. Life was hard, the economy clinging to the dwindling coal mines and small family farms. But within the hardship, there was a deep sense of community, a reliance on one another that had sustained them through generations. John Miller was a man of the land, his hands gnarled and calloused from years of tilling soil and mending fences. He was a quiet, solitary man, his life defined by the rhythmic cycles of the seasons. He had lost his wife, Mary, to pneumonia 15 years ago, leaving him alone with his son, Michael. Michael was the sunshine of John's life, a young man full of energy and optimism. He had inherited his father's strong work ethic, but also possessed a kind heart and a ready smile that could light up a room. Emily Carter had arrived in Willow Creek as a child. Orphaned and alone, she was taken in by a distant relative, but her childhood was marked by neglect and hardship. She was a quiet girl, with a fierce determination and a spirit that refused to be broken. Michael and Emily had been drawn to each other from the start. They found solace in each other's company, sharing dreams of a brighter future. Their love blossomed slowly, nurtured by shared laughter and whispered promises under the star-studded sky. They married in a small ceremony at the town's church, their faces radiant with hope. They moved into the old Miller farmhouse, working side by side to breathe new life into the dilapidated property. They planted a garden, raised chickens, and slowly built a life filled with simple joys. Their happiness, however, was shadowed by a persistent longing. Years passed, and they remained childless. The whispers began again, this time tinged with pity and judgment. Something must be wrong with her, Martha from the cafe would say. A woman's purpose is to bear children. What's the point if she can't? Despite the pressure, Michael remained steadfast in his love for Emily. But John noticed a growing tension in his son, a weariness that seemed to settle in his eyes. He knew that Michael longed for a family, and he worried about the unspoken pain that Emily carried. One sweltering afternoon, as Michael was working in the fields, he collapsed. John rushed to his side. his heart pounding with fear. Michael's face was pale, his breathing shallow. The diagnosis came like a hammer blow. Advanced stage cancer. John's world shattered. He sold off his livestock, emptied his savings, anything to afford the treatments that might save his son. Emily worked tirelessly, taking on odd jobs to help pay the mounting medical bills. But it was no use. The cancer had spread too far, too fast. In his final days, Michael lay in bed, his body ravaged by the disease. Emily sat by his side, holding his hand, her tears flowing freely. John watched them, his heart breaking with a pain he never knew existed. "Promise me, Em," Michael whispered, his voice weak but filled with love. "Promise me you'll live for both of us." Emily nodded, her voice choked with sobs. "I promise, Michael, I promise." Michael's eyes closed, and he drew one last, shuddering breath. John reached out and gently closed his son's eyes. A silent farewell to the light of his life. Michael's death left an unbearable void in the Miller farmhouse. The laughter was gone, replaced by a deafening silence. The emptiness was unbearable, and the weight of Emily's grief was palpable. It seemed as though the will to keep existing had completely abandoned her body. The silence in the Miller farmhouse was punctuated only by the drip of a leaky faucet and the ragged breaths of a broken woman. Emily, after Michael's passing, seemed to wither before John's eyes. Grief, like a relentless parasite, consumed her from the inside out. She stopped eating, stopped speaking, stopped even moving. One morning, John found her lying motionless in bed, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. He called her name, gently touched her face, but there was no response. Panic swelled within him. He called for Doc Henderson, the town's aging physician, who arrived with a weary sigh and a worn-out bag. Doc Henderson examined Emily, his face etched with concern. "It's not physical, John," he said quietly. "Her spirit's broken. She needs a reason to live." But as days turned into weeks, Emily's condition worsened. One evening, as John was trying to coax her to eat, she cried out in pain. Her legs contorted, and she screamed, a sound that ripped through John's soul. Doc Henderson returned, his expression grim. "It's a rare neurological condition, John," he explained, his voice hushed. "Grief can manifest in strange ways. Her nervous system is shutting down. She may never walk again." The news was devastating. Emily was now confined to bed, unable to move her legs, unable to care for herself. John, at 60 years old, found himself the sole caregiver for a woman consumed by grief and crippled by illness. He learned to bathe her, to feed her, to change her bedding. He spent hours talking to her, reading to her, trying to coax a flicker of life back into her eyes. He carried her to the porch so she could feel the warmth of the sun on her skin and breathe the fresh air. The hardest task was bathing her. Initially, Emily was mortified, her face flushed with shame. "John, I can't let you do this," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. John knelt beside her bed, his hand gently stroking her hair. "Emily, you're like a daughter to me. If I don't help you, who will?" His voice was filled with a quiet strength that belied his age. "Don't worry about what people might say. We'll get through this together." He washed her with the utmost care, treating her with the same respect and tenderness he would have shown his own daughter. It was a labor of love, a testament to his unwavering commitment. But the weight of care was heavy. John was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. He struggled to maintain the farm, to provide for Emily's needs, and to shield her from the whispers that had begun to circulate through the town. The whispers had grown louder, bolder, more malicious. They festered in the darkness, fueled by ignorance and suspicion. The sight of John carrying Emily, bathing her, caring for her, was twisted into something scandalous, something perverse. "It's unnatural," Martha declared at the cafe, her voice rising above the clatter of dishes. "An old man and a young woman living alone together? There's bound to be something going on. Maybe he's just a good man," Sarah countered weakly, but her voice was drowned out by the chorus of disapproval. "Good men don't bathe young women in creeks," Martha retorted, her eyes gleaming with malicious glee. "And mark my words, the truth will come out." The rumors reached Sheriff Brody, a stern, no-nonsense man who had known John Miller his entire life. He was skeptical of the gossip, but he couldn't ignore the concerns of the townspeople. He decided to pay John a visit. Sheriff Brody arrived at the Miller farmhouse. His face grim, John greeted him with a weary smile. "Sheriff, what brings you out here?" "John, there's been some talk." Brody hesitated, searching for the right words. "About you and Emily. People are saying things." John's face hardened. "I'm just taking care of her." "Sheriff, she's sick, helpless. What else am I supposed to do?" "I know, John," Brody said, his voice softening, "but you have to understand. People are worried. They don't understand. Let them worry," John said, his voice laced with anger. "I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just trying to honor my son's memory and take care of the woman he loved." Brody sighed. "I have to ask you some questions, John, for the sake of the investigation." The questions were intrusive, accusatory. John answered them patiently, his voice trembling with indignation. He felt like he was being judged, condemned for an act of pure kindness. Later that day, Brody questioned Emily. She was frail and weak, but her voice was firm. "John Miller is the best man I know," she declared, her eyes blazing with defiance. "He's been like a father to me. If it weren't for him, I'd be dead." Despite their testimonies, the rumors persisted. Some even suggested that Emily's paralysis was feigned, a ploy to ensnare John. The whispers became a constant hum in the background of their lives, a relentless torment that threatened to consume them both. The relentless scrutiny of Willow Creek began to take its toll. John, wearied by the accusations, found himself withdrawing from the town. He avoided the general store, no longer sat on the porch in the evenings, and became a ghost in the community he had always been a part of. Emily, too, felt the sting of their judgment. She overheard whispers when John carried her to the creek, saw the sidelong glances, and sensed the unease in the townspeople's eyes. The guilt gnawed at her. She felt like a burden to John, a pariah in the community, and a constant source of scandal. One particularly harsh evening, after John had finished bathing her, Emily broke down. "John, you shouldn't have to do this," she sobbed, her voice choked with despair. "It's not right. I'm ruining your life. Maybe it would be better if I just wasn't here." John's heart clenched. He cradled her in his arms, rocking her gently. "Emily, don't ever say that. You're not ruining my life. You're giving it meaning. You're the reason I get up in the morning. And I won't let you give up." "But the rumors, John. The way people look at us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Let them talk," John said fiercely. "Their words can't touch us. We know the truth, and that's all that matters." But even John's unwavering faith was shaken. He found himself questioning his own motives, wondering if he was doing the right thing. The constant pressure from the outside, coupled with the physical and emotional strain of caring for Emily, pushed him to the brink of exhaustion. One night, John sat alone on the porch, staring at the stars. The weight of the world seemed to settle upon his shoulders. He felt lost, defeated, and utterly alone. He wondered if he could continue, if he had the strength to bear the burden any longer. Suddenly, he heard a sound, a faint, hesitant knock at the door. He opened it to find Sheriff Brody standing on the porch, his face etched with a mixture of concern and resolve. "John, can I come in? We need to talk." Brody's voice was low and serious. John reluctantly stepped aside, allowing the sheriff to enter the house. The sheriff stepped inside, his gaze sweeping across the humble interior, noting the worn furniture, the faded photographs, and the palpable sense of sadness that permeated the air. "John," Brody began, "I've done some digging. I've spoken to Doc Henderson, and he's told me everything about Emily's condition. I've also spoken to a few people in town who have seen the way you care for her. They realize they were wrong. The town feels ashamed." He paused, his eyes meeting John's. "They want to make amends. They want to help." "Help?" John scoffed, his voice laced with skepticism. "After everything they've said, everything they've done, how can they help now? They want to raise money for Emily to see a specialist, someone who can give her a better chance at recovery." Brody's words hung in the air, filling the silence with a glimmer of hope. "They understand now that you were acting out of kindness, that you've done nothing wrong." John stared at Brody, his mind struggling to process the information. Could it be true? Had the hearts of the townspeople finally softened? The town's change of heart was remarkable. The whispers ceased, replaced by offers of assistance. Women brought casseroles and baked goods. Men helped with the farm chores. And children offered Emily flowers they had picked from the fields. A fundraising campaign was launched, and donations poured in from all corners of Willow Creek. The money raised was enough to send Emily to a renowned neurologist in New York City. John accompanied Emily on the long train journey, his heart filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. The specialist examined Emily, his face thoughtful. "Her condition is complex, but not hopeless," he declared. "With intensive therapy, there's a chance she could regain some movement in her legs." The therapy was grueling, but Emily was determined. She worked tirelessly, pushing herself to the limit, driven by a desire to walk again, to live again. John remained by her side, offering encouragement, wiping away her tears, and reminding her of the love that awaited her back in Willow Creek. Slowly, miraculously, Emily began to improve. First, she could wiggle her toes, then move her ankles, and finally, with the help of a walker, she was able to take a few tentative steps. The progress was slow and arduous, but it was progress nonetheless. Months later, Emily and John returned to Willow Creek. The entire town gathered to welcome them back. As Emily stepped off the train, supported by John, a hush fell over the crowd. She took a deep breath, her eyes filled with tears, and took a step, a small, shaky step, but a step nonetheless. A collective gasp swept through the crowd, followed by a thunderous applause. Emily continued to walk, her steps growing stronger and more confident with each stride. She walked towards the crowd, her face radiant with joy, her legs carrying her back into the embrace of her community. One morning, John was chopping wood in the yard when he heard a sound behind him. He turned to see Emily standing there, unaided, her eyes sparkling with happiness. "John," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I'm walking." John dropped the axe and rushed to her side, his eyes filled with tears. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight. "I knew you could do it, Em. I always knew." Life in Willow Creek slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. The Miller farmhouse, once shrouded in sorrow and suspicion, was now filled with laughter and light. Emily, having regained her ability to walk, threw herself into rebuilding her life. She tended to the garden, helped John with the farm chores, and even started teaching at the local schoolhouse. The town embraced Emily with open arms, eager to make amends for their past transgressions. Martha, the owner of the Willow Creek Cafe, became one of Emily's staunchest allies, often bringing her homemade pies and offering words of encouragement. However, amidst the newfound peace, a new challenge arose. A kind and handsome young man named Daniel moved to Willow Creek to work at the newly reopened coal mine. He was drawn to Emily's strength, her resilience, and her warm heart. He began to court her, bringing her flowers, taking her for walks along the creek, and sharing his dreams for the future. Emily found herself drawn to Daniel as well. He offered her a chance at a new beginning, a chance to experience love and companionship again. But she was torn. She felt a deep sense of loyalty and gratitude towards John, who had sacrificed everything to care for her. She couldn't imagine leaving him alone in the old farmhouse. One evening, as Emily and John were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, Emily broached the subject. "John," she began hesitantly. "Daniel, he asked me to marry him." John's face grew pale, but he maintained a steady gaze. "And what did you say, Em?" Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know, John. I care for him deeply. But I can't leave you. You've done so much for me. I owe you everything." John reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. "Emily, you don't owe me anything. I did what any decent person would have done. Your happiness is all that matters to me." "But what about you, John?" Emily asked, her voice choked with emotion. "Who will take care of you when you get old? Who will be here to keep you company?" John smiled, a bittersweet expression that tugged at Emily's heart. "I'll be all right, Em. I'm a simple man. I don't need much. And besides," he added with a wink, "I'm not that old yet." "But," Emily protested, her voice breaking. "Emily," John interrupted gently, "you deserve to be happy. You deserve to have a family. To build a life with someone you love. Don't let me stand in the way of that." Emily wrestled with her decision for weeks. She confided in Daniel, who listened patiently and offered her unwavering support. He understood her loyalty to John and assured her that he would never ask her to abandon him. Finally, Emily made her choice. She approached John with Daniel by her side, her heart filled with both joy and trepidation. "John," she began, her voice trembling slightly, Daniel and I, we want to get married. But we don't want to leave you. We want to stay here. At the farmhouse. We want to be a family. All of us. John's face lit up with a radiant smile. That's wonderful. Truly wonderful. I couldn't ask for anything more. And so, Emily and Daniel were married in a small ceremony at the Willow Creek Church. Surrounded by their friends and neighbors, John stood proudly beside them, his heart overflowing with love. Emily and Daniel moved into the Miller farmhouse, transforming it into a home filled with warmth, laughter, and the promise of new beginnings. Daniel helped John with the farm chores, and Emily continued to teach at the schoolhouse. They honored John, including him in all their decisions and cherishing his wisdom and guidance. As the years passed, John grew old and frail, but he was never lonely. Emily and Daniel cared for him with the same love and devotion that he had shown them. They read to him, sang to him, and shared stories with him, filling his days with joy and companionship. One evening, as the sun was setting, John sat on the porch, surrounded by Emily, Daniel, and their 2 young children. He looked out at the fields he had tilled for so many years, his heart filled with gratitude. I've lived a good life, he said, his voice weak but filled with peace. I've known love, loss, and everything in between, but I wouldn't trade a single moment. He reached out and took Emily's hand, his eyes filled with tenderness. You were right, he whispered. We are a family, and that's all that matters. John closed his eyes, and a gentle smile spread across his face. He took a final, peaceful breath and slipped away, surrounded by the people he loved most. The Willow Creek farmhouse stood as a testament to the enduring power of love, compassion, and forgiveness. Emily and Daniel continued to live there, raising their children and honoring John's memory. They taught their children about the importance of kindness, loyalty, and standing up for what is right, even in the face of adversity. And so, the whispers of Willow Creek transformed from tongues of fire into echoes of love. A legacy that would resonate through generations, reminding everyone that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can triumph, and the bonds of family can endure. A wide shot of the farmhouse at sunset, children playing in the yard, and Emily and Daniel sitting on the porch, holding hands, their faces etched with peace and contentment. The camera pans up to the sky, where the stars begin to twinkle, a silent tribute to the man who taught them the true meaning of love.